No one in the Polaris lounge that morning knew that the man in the grey hoodie, sitting quietly by the window, held in his hands the fate of the very airline they were about to fly. If they had known, perhaps they wouldn't have looked at him with such condescending eyes. But prejudice is always blind. It needs no reason, only habit. The sounds of the LAX VIP lounge blended into a symphony of the elite. The soft clink of crystal glasses, the smooth hum of suitcase wheels gliding over polished marble, the murmured talk of stocks, real estate, and upcoming vacations in the Maldives. Everything was expensive, even the silence. Amid that world, Jordan Mercer, 40 sat alone in a black leather chair, his hands gently clasped around a bottle of water. No champagne, no forced smiles. The light reflected off his calm, determined face, eyes sharp and calculating, as if quietly measuring the entire world. But from a distance, he was just another man of color in a hoodie, blending into a sea of Italian suits and Rolex watches. A flight attendant approached, her voice trained to please the wealthy. "Sir, would you like to try a glass of Dom Perignon?" Jordan smiled faintly. "Thank you, water will do." She nodded, but in her eyes flickered a brief flash of confusion and then disdain. In this place, rejecting luxury was almost a sin. He lowered his gaze to his tablet. Numbers filled the screen. Logistics reports, price charts, contracts awaiting his approval. With a single signature, Ascend Air would secure a $50 million annual deal with Vidian Dynamics, the tech empire Jordan had built from a small garage 15 years ago. A deal that could raise Ascend's stock value by 30%. But what no one knew was that today, Jordan was the one testing them. He hadn't told anyone about this trip, hadn't used his private jet, and hadn't booked the ticket under his real name. He'd bought a first-class seat himself using a personal card under the simple alias J. Mercer. No security, no assistance. Just a man who wanted to see for himself if the airline he was about to invest in truly lived up to the premium service culture it so proudly advertised. Naomi Blake, his trusted COO, had warned him, "Jordan, you're really flying alone. If they recognize you." "Better if they don't," he'd replied. "When people think you're just a nobody, that's when they show who they really are." And today, that truth was about to surface. At the next table, a man in a suit muttered to his friend, "I swear, they let anyone into this lounge now. Look, a hoodie, probably a lost college kid." Jordan heard it. He didn't look up. He didn't react. He just smiled faintly. He had heard those words 1,000 times at university, in boardrooms, even from investors before they'd seen his signature. But this time, he didn't need to argue. He just needed to observe. Sunlight poured across the glossy floor. Outside, an Ascend Air jet was being towed to the runway, its silver fuselage gleaming with the blue wing logo, the company's pride. Jordan tilted his head, eyes thoughtful. Everything had been calculated. If their service lived up to the standard, they would earn the deal. If not, they would lose everything. The boarding call sounded. Jordan rose, slinging over his worn leather backpack, the same one he'd carried since his startup days. He walked between rows of leather chairs, passing by a few judgmental glances. Someone murmured, "Can't believe who they let into first class these days." He didn't respond. He just smiled. If they knew who he was, they'd be the ones offering him a seat. But as always, Jordan preferred to let people reveal themselves. At the gate, the attendant scanned his ticket and paused. First class. She looked up, slightly surprised, but the expression quickly vanished, replaced with a professional smile. "Have a pleasant flight, sir." Jordan nodded. "Thank you." He stepped into the first-class cabin. Quiet, luxurious, the scent of new leather mingled with warm cedar. Seat 1A, the very front, spacious like a private suite. He placed his bag down, buckled his seatbelt, and closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to listen. Because when you listen, you learn everything. How attendants speak to passengers, how they react under pressure, how they look at those who don't fit their image of belonging. Jordan didn't yet know that within minutes, Seat 1A would become the eye of a storm. And that storm, a woman with blonde hair, a sharp voice, and an inflated sense of power, was about to arrive. At the front of the cabin, Tessa Ward, 30-4, the lead flight attendant, was reviewing her list of first-class passengers. She bit her lip when she saw the name J. Mercer. Unfamiliar, not on the VIP roster. Must be an upgrade error, she thought. But instead of verifying, she ignored it. Too busy chatting with Victoria Hale, 40R6, a long-time Platinum member, wife of Hale Logistics CEO, and notorious for demanding Seat 1A, as usual. "Ms. Hale, you'll be in 1A again today, right?" Victoria smiled coolly. "Of course. They know me. No one would dare sit there." If only she knew that the man in her seat could erase her entire company with a single tap of his screen. Jordan opened his eyes, glancing toward the window. The plane's engines began to hum softly. He inhaled, calm, collected. Part of him was curious. Part of him sensed what was coming, that this flight wouldn't just test a company's service, but expose an entire mindset, a world that confused status with worth. Ascendair Flight 715 was ready for takeoff. Somewhere between the clouds, prejudice was about to meet its reckoning. The soft squeak of suitcase wheels brushed against the carpet as the first passengers boarded the plane. The lighting in the first-class cabin was warm and luxurious, designed to make people forget they were 30,000 feet above the ground. But for 42-year-old Jordan Mercer, every detail here was data. Every action, every tone of voice, every glance. Each was part of the field test he had designed for Ascendair. Sitting quietly in Seat 1A, the one closest to the cockpit, he opened his tablet to review the final metrics of a multi-million-dollar deal. Outside, sunlight glinted off the aircraft's metallic body, reflecting through the window. In that calm silence, he could already sense the chill of something about to unfold. A sharp, high-pitched voice sliced through the quiet. "Excuse me, what is going on here?" Jordan looked up. Standing before him was Victoria Hale, a woman in her 40s, her golden hair perfectly curled, a cream-colored pantsuit pressed to perfection, and a Cartier bracelet weighing down her wrist. Her eyes were cold, her lips tight, the look of someone accustomed to commanding, not asking. "This is my seat," she declared firmly. Jordan blinked, his tone polite but steady. I'm sorry, but my ticket says 1A. He held out his boarding pass, the line Seat 1A, first class clearly visible. Victoria didn't even glance at it. Impossible. I always sit in 1A. They know that. The system must have glitched. Her voice carried a mix of irritation and arrogance, as if his mere presence there was a personal insult. Tessa Ward, the lead flight attendant, approached. The professional smile on her face was tight, hiding a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Is there an issue, Mrs. Hale?" "There is," Victoria snapped. "Someone's sitting in my seat. Handle it." Tessa turned to Jordan, her tone courteous but hesitant. "Sir, may I see your ticket, please?" Jordan wordlessly handed it over. She checked it, frowning. "Yes, this is indeed Seat 1A. She turned back to Victoria. "Mrs. Hale, may I see your ticket, please?" Victoria scoffed, rummaging through her Hermes bag. "I don't need to prove anything. Everyone here knows I'm always assigned this seat. Probably a system error." Then she tilted her chin toward Jordan. "He can sit in 2A. It's identical. It's just that this seat isn't meant for someone like him." The last line fell like a thin, sharp blade through the air. Jordan felt the subtle shift in the cabin as eyes turned toward him, half curious, half disapproving. He didn't get angry. He simply looked at her with calm, almost pitying composure. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I don't wish to argue, but this is the seat I paid for, and I intend to sit in it." Victoria's lips curled. "How disrespectful." She turned to Tessa. "Fix this now. I have an important meeting in Seattle. I don't have time for this nonsense." The invisible pressure settled on Tessa's shoulders. She hesitated, then chose the easier path instead of the right one. "Sir," she said softly but firmly, "Seat 2A behind you is also first class. If you would kindly move, we can depart on time." Jordan lifted his gaze, eyes steady and cold. "I understand, but I paid for this seat, and I will not move." The silence that followed was heavy. Passengers exchanged glances, murmurs, raised brows. In Tessa's mind, the fear of delay outweighed the fear of doing wrong. "Sir," she lowered her voice, "if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to call the captain." Jordan nodded. "Go ahead." His calm tone unnerved her more than defiance ever could. Moments later, Captain Martin Keene, 58, appeared. His silver hair was neatly cropped, his demeanor radiating the authority of a man too accustomed to control. He scanned the cabin, his eyes landing on Victoria first. "Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We'll take care of this immediately." Then he turned to Jordan, avoiding direct eye contact. "Sir, could you please move to the next seat? This is our protocol in cases of duplicate assignments for VIP passengers." "Which protocol?" Jordan asked, voice low and sharp. "An internal one," Keene replied, his tone evasive. "Otherwise, we'll have to ask you to disembark." The entire cabin froze. A first-class passenger being threatened with removal simply for not being elite enough. Jordan met the captain's gaze. "I'm not causing a disturbance. I'm sitting in the seat I purchased. If you want me off, go ahead." In that instant, their eyes locked, one man clinging to outdated authority, the other grounded in the quiet confidence of someone who truly understood where power came from. Finally, Keene exhaled heavily, eager to end the standoff. I'm sorry, sir, but we must maintain our schedule. Jordan said nothing. He unbuckled his seatbelt, rose calmly, and retrieved his old leather backpack from the overhead bin. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply said, "All right." He moved to seat 2A. Victoria sat down in 1A, muttering, "That's better. Things would be simpler if people just knew their place." Tessa smiled, bending to pour her champagne. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Hale." Jordan sat quietly behind them, eyes fixed on the window. A beam of sunlight cut across his face, cold, serene, unshaken. Outside, the plane began to taxi down the runway. Inside, a lesson worth $50 million had just been recorded. He opened his tablet, accessing the secure Vidian Dynamics channel. A message flashed across the screen. Jordan Mercer. Naomi, cancel all negotiations with Ascend Air. Effective immediately. Naomi Blake. Reason? Jordan. Data confirmed. He set the tablet down, the corner of his mouth lifting, not in triumph, but in disappointment. As the plane lifted off, the first-class cabin trembled softly. Tessa poured wine for Victoria, while Jordan, in silence, began dismantling Ascend Air's future, line by line. The engines rumbled softly as Ascend Air Flight 705 lifted off the ground. The skyline of Los Angeles stretched beneath it, the clouds drifting lazily, as if unaware that inside the first-class cabin, a quiet storm was beginning to form. Jordan Mercer sat in seat 2A, just behind Victoria Hale, who was sipping complimentary champagne with a smug smile of victory. Tessa Ward, the lead flight attendant, smiled obligingly as she poured another glass, bowing slightly as if Victoria had just signed her paycheck. Jordan remained silent, but inside him, waves of anger rolled, cold and precise, like lines of code running through a flawless algorithm. He didn't need to shout. He only needed to observe. The tablet on the small table in front of him glowed softly, reflecting his composed, unreadable face. On the screen was the secure internal chat of Vidian Dynamics. Jordan. Naomi, prepare a priority call. Bring Victor Lang in. Naomi. Standing by. Did something happen? Jordan. No. Just a failed experiment. His fingers moved across the screen, deliberate and steady. Jordan. Terminate all negotiations with Ascend Air. Effective immediately. Victor Lang. Legal. Confirmed. Official reason? Jordan. State clearly. Evidence of discriminatory conduct and a service culture misaligned with Vidian standards. Those few lines were a death sentence for an entire company. One tap of send, and more than $50 million in annual revenue for Ascend Air vanished into thin air. Jordan leaned back and closed his eyes. He could hear Victoria laughing, her voice sharp and shallow as she told Tessa, "You see, some people need to be reminded of their place in this society." The words cut through him like a blade, stirring old memories. 10 years earlier, at his first investor meeting, a white partner had said something almost identical. "You're talented, but looking at you, I just don't see a CEO." Back then, Jordan hadn't argued. He had bowed his head. Then he built Vidian Dynamics from nothing, and turned those same men into clients. Now, hearing those words again, he didn't bow. He opened his email and composed a short message to his COO, Naomi Blake. Jordan. Redirect all focus to Apex Airlines. Call Olivia Park. If she can arrange a virtual meeting within 1 hour after I land, the contract is hers. No negotiation. He pressed send. A single decisive line drawn between two worlds, those who respect and those who belittle. In front of him, Tessa Ward was still trying to project professionalism. She chatted softly with Victoria, occasionally glancing back at Jordan. In her mind, one thought repeated, I did the right thing. She's the VIP. I can't risk my job over some nobody. She didn't know that the nobody sitting behind her had just erased her company's name from a multi-million-dollar partnership list. Captain Martin Keene stepped out of the cockpit, glanced over the cabin, and whispered to Tessa, Everything good? Handled, she replied quickly. He moved. Good. Stay on schedule. I don't want any trouble. He turned away, not realizing he had just signed the death warrant for his own career. As the plane reached cruising altitude, sunlight flooded through the windows. Jordan opened a video call. Naomi Blake's face appeared, focused, composed. You all right? She asked. Jordan nodded slightly. I am. But Ascend Air isn't. Naomi fell silent for a moment before asking, What happened? Jordan explained, briefly, without emotion. The looks, the tone, the subtle contempt, the moment the captain had threatened him, the way that woman had spoken down to him. He didn't embellish. The truth itself was enough to condemn. On the other end, Naomi's jaw tightened. Her voice turned cold. Understood. I'll have legal send the termination letter within 30 minutes. Jordan added, Make sure it includes this. Vidian Dynamics does not partner with organizations that tolerate discrimination. This isn't a service failure. It's a moral failure. He ended the call and leaned back, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the glass. Clouds drifted by, white, silent, and weightless, just like his thoughts. In the front cabin, Victoria was talking to Tessa about her new mansion in Malibu. My husband just bought it, she said proudly. We only choose the best. Jordan smiled faintly, not in amusement, but irony. Her version of the best had just been erased from Vidian's preferred client list. Karma, he thought, didn't always need time. Sometimes it just needed a strong Wi-Fi signal. 30,000 feet above the ground, Jordan Mercer was performing corporate surgery in silence. Each tap of his fingers was cold, calculated, irreversible. Within the hour, Ascend Air had lost the largest contract in its history. He opened his notes and typed one final observation. Observation. When power is placed in the wrong hands, service collapses. Conclusion. Ascend Air, unfit for partnership. He closed the tablet, his gaze lifting toward the front cabin, where Victoria was still enjoying her illusion of triumph. She didn't know that at that exact moment, her husband's career was crumbling below. Jordan whispered softly to himself, I didn't need to win back the seat. I took back something greater, the truth. He leaned back, eyes half closed. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a streak of gold across his face, as if the sky itself bore witness to the rise of a man once underestimated. His anger had cooled, but its power was moving, silent, unstoppable, and irreversible. And far ahead, on the cold ground of Seattle, those who had underestimated him were about to learn that sometimes karma lands faster than the plane itself. The landing announcement echoed through the cabin as Ascend Air Flight 715 pierced a thick layer of clouds and shuddered slightly before touching down. Inside first class, the air felt frozen in place. Jordan Mercer sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the window, his expression calm to the point of intimidation. Everything was already in motion. The report, the termination letter, the communication plan, all prepared and waiting. The moment the plane's wheels hit the Seattle runway, the verdict would be delivered. Up front, Victoria Hale stretched, satisfied, wearing the smugness of someone who thought she had won. She didn't know that smile would be the last of her privileged life. "Thank you, Tessa," she said, placing her glass down. "You handled that very professionally." Tessa smiled. "It was my pleasure, ma'am." Jordan heard every word, but he didn't look back. He didn't need to. The price had already been set. When the plane came to a stop, and the soft ding signaled it was safe to remove seatbelts, the first-class passengers stood up, retrieving their luggage and chatting casually. Jordan remained seated. He never rushed to leave first, especially when he was the one controlling where they were all headed. Victoria glanced over her shoulder, noticing him still seated, and smirked. "At least this time you know your place." Jordan looked up, his voice calm and eerily steady. "You're right," he said softly. "I know exactly where I stand." When most passengers had gone, Jordan finally rose. He slung his worn backpack over his shoulder, adjusted his grey hoodie, and walked out. But instead of heading for the exit, he saw Naomi Blake waiting near the gate, flanked by two men in dark suits. The COO of Vidian Dynamics had flown ahead on the company jet just to be there for this moment. "You're here," she said, her tone cool, skipping any formal greeting. Jordan nodded. "Everything ready?" Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Legal and media are set. But there's one thing left. Do you want to do it yourself?" His eyes sharpened. "Yes." Some people need to hear it directly. In the distance, Raymond Wu, Ascend Air's regional manager, rushed toward them, sweat beading on his forehead, phone clutched tightly in hand. His face drained of color when he saw Jordan and the Vidian team waiting. "Mr. Mercer, I just received the termination notice. There must be some kind of misunderstanding." Jordan said. "Nothing." His gaze went past Raymond, toward the flight crew emerging from the jet bridge. Captain Martin Keene pulled his suitcase along, Tessa Ward walking beside him, chatting lightly with a colleague. They had no idea what awaited them. Naomi gave a subtle nod to a member of the legal team. The man stepped forward. "Captain Keene, Ms. Ward," he said evenly. "Mr. Mercer would like a word." Both of them stopped. Keene frowned. "Mercer who?" Jordan stepped forward. "That would be me." Tessa froze for a split second. She looked at him closely, the hoodie, the old backpack. But his eyes were different now. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. "Is there a problem?" Keene asked, his voice edged with defiance. Jordan met his gaze, his tone low but cutting through the terminal like thunder. "Yes, a $50 million problem." The air went still. Raymond Wu went pale, glancing around nervously. "Mr. Mercer, perhaps we should speak privately." Jordan waved him off. "No need for privacy. Everyone should hear this, because this is a lesson worth remembering." He stepped closer, facing Keen and Tessa directly. "I'm Jordan Mercer, CEO of Vidian Dynamics. I flew with you today, not to be served, but to see how Ascend Air treats its passengers." Silence. Tessa's mouth fell open. Keen stood frozen, his posture stiff as stone. Jordan continued, his voice calm, but each word hit like a hammer. "You had a chance to show what your company truly stands for. Instead of fairness, you chose favoritism. Instead of service, you chose judgment. And instead of respecting people, you chose status." He turned toward Raymond Wu, whose hands trembled as he clutched his phone. "Mr. Wu, the termination letter between Vidian Dynamics and Ascend Air was sent to your CEO, Peter Caldwell, 10 minutes ago. The reason? Discrimination and violation of corporate ethics." Raymond's voice broke. "Oh my God, Mr. Mercer, please, we can renegotiate." Jordan cut him off. "There's nothing left to negotiate. You didn't just lose a contract, you lost trust." He turned back to Keen and Tessa, his gaze sharp as glass. "You didn't know who I was, and you didn't need to. But you should have known that every small action carries a consequence. Today, I don't need to fire anyone. I just fired your company's future." His voice was slow, steady, and cold. "I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. Because even at 30,000 feet, I could see the depths of prejudice buried in an airline that calls itself the most elite in America." Tessa's lips trembled. I was just following policy, sir." Jordan nodded slightly. "Bad policy breeds bad choices, but I hope you remember this. Sometimes the only thing standing between a person and losing everything is a single fair decision." He turned and walked away. Naomi and the legal team followed in silence. The only sound was the hollow roll of suitcases echoing through the terminal. Behind them, Keen and Tessa stood frozen. Raymond Wu frantically dialed his phone, calling headquarters over and over. But it was already too late. An hour later, at Ascend Air's headquarters, CEO Peter Caldwell opened an email from Vidian Dynamics. Just a few lines, cold and clinical. Subject: termination of partnership. Body: due to a serious incident involving discriminatory behavior toward our CEO on Flight 759, Vidian Dynamics hereby terminates all negotiations and partnerships with Ascend Air, effective immediately. Peter's hand began to tremble as he read the words, "Our CEO." The coffee cup slipped from his grasp and shattered. God, their CEO. Mercer is... But there was no need for an answer. At LAX, he had been just a man in a hoodie. But in Seattle, Jordan Mercer was the man who had just broken Ascend Air's wings forever. Rain fell over Seattle that afternoon. Droplets streamed down the tall glass windows of Ascend Air's headquarters, as if the sky itself were mourning the downfall of a company whose wings had just been cut. In the conference room on the 40th floor, CEO Peter Caldwell stood frozen, staring at the crimson subject line projected on the screen. Subject: termination of partnership. Effective immediately. The email from Vidian Dynamics was short, cold, and left no room for negotiation. Only 86 words, but each one a bullet straight to the heart of the airline. You can't be serious," the head of finance stammered. "They cancelled everything, even the 10-year deal." Peter didn't answer. He slammed the folder on the table, the sound sharp and final. "One flight," he said hoarsely. "One flight, and we lost $50 million. No one dared to breathe. Down the hall, Captain Martin Keene had been summoned to an emergency meeting with Internal Affairs. He sat across from 3 people, a lawyer, an HR representative, and a senior operations director. The investigator's voice was calm, but cold. "We have received an official report from Vidian Dynamics. They allege that Flight 715 involved discriminatory behavior, threats toward a passenger, and a serious breach of service protocol." Keene forced a nervous smile. "It was just a misunderstanding. The passenger was uncooperative. I was only trying to avoid trouble for the company." The investigator tapped his pen lightly on the table. "Do you know who that passenger was?" Keene frowned. A black man, looked ordinary. The investigator's next words hit like a hammer. "That man was Jordan Mercer, CEO of Vidian Dynamics, the one overseeing the entire $50 million contract your company was pursuing." The room fell silent. Keene's face drained of color, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. In the adjoining room, lead flight attendant Tessa Ward sat with her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. She could hear the conversation through the thin wall, her breath quick and shallow. Meanwhile, the story was spreading across the internet like wildfire. A tech blogger, Tyler Brooks, who had been on the same flight, uploaded a short video clip, Captain Keene threatening to remove the passenger from the plane, while a man in a grey hoodie sat quietly, calm and composed. Tyler captioned it. "I just watched Ascend Air throw away tens of millions to please a Karen, and now I know why this airline is falling from the sky." The 30-second video exploded. Within 12 hours, the hashtag #AscendFail hit #1 on Twitter. News outlets, podcasts, and television reports all focused on the same headline. Airline humiliates black CEO and pays the price with a multi-million-dollar contract. Ascend Air's stock plummeted 15% the next morning. Nearly $500 million in market value evaporated within hours. In the PR office, the communications team scrambled to write a statement. "We sincerely apologize for the unfortunate incident on Flight 715. Ascend Air is reviewing its policies and reinforcing its commitment to equality." But the internet wasn't forgiving. Under the official post, thousands of furious comments flooded in. "Reviewing? You only apologize when you lose money. An airline that allows discrimination doesn't deserve passengers. Jordan Mercer just taught them a $50 million lesson." Each comment was a blade cutting deeper. 3 days later, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was suffocating, like a courtroom before sentencing. One senior member glared at Peter Caldwell. "You allowed a CEO to be humiliated on your plane. This isn't just a lost contract, it's a lost reputation. Do you really think the market will ever trust us again?" Peter tried to keep his voice steady. "We've launched an internal review. Captain Keene and Ms. Ward have been suspended. But the damage is—" "Not damage," another member interrupted sharply. "A catastrophe. The stock is in free fall. Corporate clients are cancelling en masse. If we don't act now, Ascend Air will be bankrupt in 6 months. A vote was taken. The result? Peter Caldwell was removed as CEO effective immediately. The news spread through the building like wildfire. Employees whispered in the hallways, fear in their eyes. Tessa Ward was called to HR, handed a letter of indefinite suspension. As she left the building, no one said goodbye. Captain Keene, once respected, quietly filed for early retirement to avoid being terminated. In just 3 days, 2 people who once embodied Ascend Air's standard of excellence had become the faces of its downfall. Across the city, inside the glass office of Vidian Dynamics, Jordan Mercer read the headlines about Ascend Air. Not with joy, not with gloating, but with a deep, reflective silence. Naomi Blake entered, placing a new folder on his desk. "They signed," she said. "Apex Airlines. No negotiation, no conditions." Jordan nodded. "Good. They understand something Ascend never did. The value of human dignity." He stood, walking to the window. Outside, the rain fell hard and steady. "You know, Naomi," he said softly, "sometimes justice doesn't need noise or vengeance. It just needs one calm person with enough power to make others see the consequences." Naomi said nothing, only watched him. The man once dismissed as just another passenger in a grey hoodie, now the embodiment of composure and conviction. Across every financial news outlet, headlines filled the screens. Ascend Air loses $50 million contract. Vidian CEO Mercer ends partnership over discrimination. The most expensive fall in aviation history. And on social media, one comment was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Sometimes the man kicked out of seat 1A is the same man who can shut down the whole airline. Jordan read it, a faint smile forming on his lips. He didn't need revenge. He only needed the truth to be seen. Because justice, when done right, never needs to shout. A week after the media storm, the world believed Ascend Air had already hit rock bottom. But karma never stops at an apology. It spreads like oil on water, seeping deep until it ignites at the moment people least expect. In Vidian Dynamics' new office, Naomi Blake entered with a thick folder in hand. "There's something you should see." Jordan Mercer looked up. "Ascend again?" Naomi shook her head. "No. Hale Logistics." The name made Jordan raise an eyebrow. Hale Logistics? How are they connected? Naomi opened her laptop and turned the screen toward him. A vendor list appeared. On line 17 it read, "Hale Logistics, Tier 3 vendor, Synapse component supplier." Jordan narrowed his eyes. "Stephen Hale?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, husband of Victoria Hale, the woman who kicked you out of seat 1A. The room fell silent. Outside, Seattle's rain drummed steadily against the glass, grey and heavy, as if announcing another reckoning. Jordan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "How long have they been a supplier?" "Nearly 3 years. They provide transport components for the Synapse project, roughly $12 million a year." Jordan nodded slowly. "I remember. Always on time, competitive pricing. But now," he paused, his eyes turning cold, "now their moral value no longer aligns with Vidian's." Naomi understood exactly what that meant. "You want to invoke the ethics clause?" Jordan's voice was sharp, decisive. "Immediately." That same morning, Victor Lang, Vidian's head of legal, received direct instructions. Draft a termination letter to Hale Logistics, effective immediately. The reason? Severe ethical violations and damage to brand integrity through the conduct of a company representative. Within hours, the letter was sent. Across the city, Stephen Hale, CEO of Hale Logistics, was in a meeting with his executive team when his assistant burst through the door, pale and trembling. "Mr. Hale, urgent email from Vidian." Stephen grabbed his tablet and read quickly. His eyes widened. His entire body went rigid. "We hereby terminate the partnership between Vidian Dynamics and Hale Logistics, effective immediately." He read the last line aloud. The reason? "Due to public acts of discrimination and offensive behavior by a company representative, Mrs. Victoria Hale." The room fell silent. A young director whispered, "Do they mean your wife?" Stephen looked up, his face ashen. "Yes." Outside, rain pounded harder against the windows. He stormed out into his car and dialed his wife's number. "Victoria. Darling, are you home? I was just... Be quiet." His voice cracked. "What did you do on that flight?" There was silence on the other end, then her hesitant defense. "What are you talking about? It was nothing. Some rude guy arguing with a flight attendant." "That rude guy was the CEO of Vidian, the CEO of our biggest client. Do you understand? You just destroyed 60% of this company's revenue." The laughter in her tone vanished. "What?" "Vidian terminated the contract, effective immediately. They used your name in the statement. Do you realize what that means? Every other partner will follow." A long pause. Then Victoria's voice broke into quiet sobs. "I didn't mean to. I just thought—" "You thought what?" he shouted, his voice shaking. "That you're entitled to look down on people because of money? We're about to lose everything." He hung up. The sound of rain against the windshield merged with the ragged breathing of a man watching his life's work crumble in seconds. 2 days later, Hale Logistics officially announced a temporary suspension of operations for restructuring. In the financial world, everyone knew it was corporate code for bankruptcy. Investors fled. Contracts were severed. The Wall Street Journal headline read, "The Ripple Effect of the Ascend Air Scandal. How one act of discrimination destroyed 2 empires." The accompanying photo showed Victoria Hale in an elegant outfit, captured by paparazzi as she hurried out of her mansion, face pale and eyes vacant with shock. At Vidian's headquarters, Jordan Mercer sat in a conference room, quietly scrolling through the headline on a large display. He wasn't pleased. He wasn't triumphant. "How do you feel?" Naomi asked softly. Jordan's voice was calm. "Honestly, I just feel sad. No one deserves to lose everything over a single moment of arrogance. But sometimes, that's the only way the world learns its limits." He stood and looked out the window. The rain over Seattle had stopped, but the clouds still hung heavy. "Send a note to Apex," he said. "Thank them for their trust in Vidian. And tell CSR I want to establish a scholarship fund under the Synapse name for minority students pursuing technology." Naomi smiled faintly. "Turning anger into action again?" Jordan nodded gently. Anger doesn't change the world. Action does. Elsewhere, Victoria Hale sat alone in the darkened living room of her now empty mansion. The television played a financial news report on the collapse of Hale Logistics. The anchor ended with the line, "And this has become the most expensive lesson in the history of logistics. There is no first-class seat reserved for arrogance." Victoria turned off the TV. The last drop of wine reflected dim light in her glass. Outside, the wind blew the door ajar, letting in the cold night air. For the first time in her life, she felt small. Far above the city, an Apex Airlines jet glided through the clouds, its beacon blinking in the dark. Inside, Jordan sat by the window, calm, the dim cabin light outlining his composed face. He looked out at the layers of clouds rolling like a vast white ocean. Naomi's final words before he left still echoed in his mind. "You know, Jordan, karma doesn't come to punish. It comes to correct." He smiled faintly. Beyond the window, the sky was wide, quiet, and clearer than ever. 6 months had passed since Flight 715, the event that shook the entire aviation industry. Ascend Air had plummeted like a bird with broken wings, losing contracts, losing credibility, losing the very soul of its brand. Yet within the ashes, something was stirring, struggling to be reborn. On a Monday morning, Naomi Blake entered the CEO's office at Vidian Dynamics with a white envelope in hand. "Letter from Ascend," she said, her tone neutral. "Sent by their new CEO, Daniela Costa." Jordan looked up, his brows slightly furrowing. "They're still standing?" Naomi nodded. "Barely, but yes. It seems they're trying to redeem themselves." He took the envelope and opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, without flourish. "Dear Mr. Mercer, I am Daniela Costa, the new CEO of Ascend Air. I am not writing to ask for our contract back, but to thank you. Your actions, though ruthless to us, were the medicine this company desperately needed. We allowed arrogance and privilege to blind us, and you exposed that sickness with surgical precision. I would like to invite you to meet our new leadership team, not to negotiate, but to listen. We do not seek pity. We seek truth. Please help us see what we were once too blind to recognize." Jordan read the final line, then set the letter down, his eyes deep in thought. Naomi watched him for a moment before asking quietly, "You're not planning to go, are you?" Jordan remained silent. Outside the window, Seattle greeted the morning with a soft drizzle. He lifted his cup of coffee and spoke in a low voice. "Naomi, do you know what I believe in most?" "Justice," she answered without hesitation. He shook his head. "No, evolution. Justice is where it begins. Evolution is what keeps us from repeating our mistakes." Naomi frowned. "You mean you're going?" Jordan nodded. "Yes, not for them. For those who come after me. So they'll never have to sit in seat 2A just because of their skin color or their clothes." 3 days later, at the discreet and elegant Poolfree Hotel in downtown Seattle, a private meeting was arranged. No reporters knew about it. No cameras, no PR team, no spokespersons. Just a small round table between two forces that had once stood as adversaries, Vidian Dynamics and Ascend Air. The meeting room was designed in minimalist Zen style. Grey walls, an oak table, and a large window overlooking a stone garden. Everything was calm, understated, far removed from the glossy boardrooms where decisions were once ruled by cold numbers. At precisely the scheduled time, Jordan and Naomi entered. Waiting to greet them was Daniela Costa, a 50-year-old woman with cropped hair and eyes that carried both gravity and grace. She wore no makeup, no excess. Beside her sat 4 of Ascend's new executives: Priya Menon, head of HR, Lucas Romero, COO, Helen Zhou, legal advisor, and Miguel Stone, head of flight services. Daniela rose to shake Jordan's hand. The handshake was firm, sincere, free of pretense. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We don't deserve your time or patience, but we hope to hear the truth, from start to finish, without evasion." Jordan looked around the room. The soft light illuminated faces that carried both fear and hope. He sat down, folded his arms, and spoke with calm strength. "I didn't come here to lecture. I came because I believe every system can be fixed if people are brave enough to face their own flaws." Daniela nodded slowly. "Then tell us, please, what was our mistake?" Jordan met her gaze. "It wasn't just that incident, not just the captain or the attendant. Your mistake lies in the power structure you built yourselves. You created a culture that glorified status instead of dignity, that rewarded flattery instead of fairness, that trained employees to bow to privilege instead of teaching them to recognize humanity." The room was silent. Priya took rapid notes. Lucas lowered his head. Jordan continued, his words slicing through the still air. "I don't blame Tessa or Keane. They were products of a distorted system. When a structure rewards the wrong behavior and punishes the wrong mistakes, those mistakes become habit." Daniela exhaled slowly, her voice soft but heavy. "We're trying to change. We've abolished the entire priority service policy. But it still feels incomplete. Maybe because we still don't understand what you understand." Jordan leaned forward, his eyes sharp with conviction. "What I understand, Ms. Costa, is that real change begins with awareness, not fear. You can write 100 new policies, but if your people's hearts don't change, those papers are just ink on white sheets." He paused, then spoke deliberately, each word carrying weight. "A company doesn't need employees who fear being wrong. It needs employees brave enough to be right." The words hung in the air like a bell's echo. Only the soft sound of rain outside broke the silence. Daniela stood, hands clasped, and bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Few CEOs would return to help those who once wronged them. But you did. You didn't just destroy us. You're helping us be reborn." Jordan smiled faintly. "I didn't destroy anyone. I just held up a mirror." Beside him, Naomi watched with quiet pride. In that moment, the man once forced out of Seat 1A was no longer a victim. He was a catalyst for a new standard. When the meeting ended, Daniela walked them to the door. "We've decided to name our new training program Dignity First," she said. Jordan stopped, turned to her, and smiled. "A beautiful name. Just make sure it's more than a slogan." "It won't be," Daniela replied. "It will be our compass." Jordan nodded and stepped outside. The rain had stopped. A faint sunlight pierced through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the quiet stone garden. A single white flower had bloomed among the dry pebbles, small, fragile, but unyielding. Jordan looked at it and whispered, "Sometimes the most beautiful thing isn't victory. It's awakening." 1 year after the fateful meeting at the Poolfrey Hotel, the name Ascend Air, once boycotted by the entire world, appeared again on the cover of Forbes. But this time, it wasn't for profits or performance. It was for something far rarer: the moral rebirth of a corporation. Under the leadership of Daniela Costa, the airline had done what few companies ever dare to do. They started over from zero, guided by a single principle: the dignity of every human being. That morning, in the boardroom on the 20th floor of their new headquarters, sunlight streamed through the glass wall, illuminating the words engraved across the main hall. Dignity first. Every human being deserves respect. Priya Menon, the new HR director, presented a training initiative that used virtual reality to teach empathy. On screen, a flight attendant experienced what it felt like to be insulted for their appearance, skin color, or gender. To feel, rather than simply be told, what it means to be devalued. "We can't teach compassion through manuals," Priya said firmly, "but we can make people feel it." Lucas Romero, head of operations, added, "We're also introducing a lifetime no-fly list, not for violence, but for abuse of status. If a passenger disrespects a crew member, they have no seat on any Ascend flight." The room was silent for a few seconds, then filled with applause. Daniela nodded, her eyes glimmering with conviction. "Do it, and make it public. No more hiding. The moment we dare to say no to what's wrong, that's when our brand finally gains real worth." Over the next 6 months, the aviation industry witnessed something unprecedented. Ascend Air launched its zero tolerance for status abuse policy. Every flight attendant now had the right to refuse service to any passenger who insulted another, regardless of their elite membership or VIP title. At first, the media was skeptical. How could a company once accused of discrimination now take the opposite stand? But then, new stories began to spread. A viral TikTok video showed a middle-aged man berating a flight attendant for slow champagne service. The attendant smiled calmly and said, "Sir, Ascend Air does not serve passengers who insult our crew. If you wish to continue this flight, please adjust your attitude." The clip hit 20 million views in just 24 hours. The comments poured in. Ascend Air really has changed. "This is the first airline that makes me feel human dignity actually matters." For the first time since the disaster a year earlier, the name Ascend Air was no longer synonymous with shame, but with courage. At Vidian Dynamics, Naomi Blake walked into Jordan Mercer's office, holding a CNN report titled "The Reinvention of Ascend Air." She placed it on his desk with a smile. "See? They actually did it." Jordan looked up, his gaze resting on the photo of Daniela Costa, standing proudly among her staff, the slogan behind her reading, "Everyone is equal at 30,000 feet." "She kept her word," he said softly. "And that's rare, Naomi. Very rare." Naomi nodded. "They're calling them the Phoenix Airline." Jordan leaned back, a faint smile curving his lips. A phoenix only rises when it dares to burn first. They did what most companies never will, admit they were wrong. A week later, Daniela Costa personally sent an invitation to Vidian Dynamics for the unveiling of the Dignity First protocol, Ascend Air's new corporate framework for fairness and human respect. The ceremony was modest, sincere, stripped of extravagance. No champagne, no VIPs, just employees from every rank, pilots, attendants, engineers. On stage, Daniela held the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion. Last year, we forced a man out of seat 1A because he didn't look wealthy enough. Today we pledge that no one, anywhere in the world, will ever be treated that way on our flights again. The audience erupted in applause. Jordan sat in the front row, smiling quietly. In that moment, he no longer saw their past mistakes, only their transformation. After the ceremony, Daniela approached him. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly, "if not for you, we wouldn't still exist. But I don't want to call you our judge. You were our savior from ourselves." Jordan replied with warmth and calm, "No one saves anyone, Daniela. I simply held up a mirror. You were brave enough to look." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "If you ever wish to return to seat 1A, know that it will always be waiting." Jordan smiled back. "I don't need seat 1A. I just need to know that whoever sits there, no matter who they are, is treated as a human being." That evening, back at his office, Jordan stood by the window, gazing out over the glowing city. Below, the towers shimmered like constellations. He thought about the long journey, from a man once humiliated on a flight to a symbol of change. Inside him, there was no anger left. Only peace, the kind that comes when justice is fulfilled without vengeance. Naomi joined him quietly. "You know, Jordan," she said, "people are calling you the man who made the entire airline industry change." He chuckled and shook his head. "I'm just a man who was asked to leave seat 1A, and I never want anyone else to go through that again." The night sky was calm. An Ascend airplane soared across the horizon, leaving a long, gleaming trail behind. Jordan watched it disappear into the stars and whispered, "Fly on. This time, fly the right way." While the world praised Ascend Air as a symbol of rebirth, somewhere out there, the people who had caused the storm still lived in the shadow of its aftermath. Because karma, no matter how long it takes, always finds the right door to knock on. Victoria Hale, the woman who once believed seat 1A was her birthright, now sat curled up in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of Portland. The lavish Malibu mansion had been repossessed by the bank. The Ferrari she once flaunted existed only in photographs. On the table lay unsigned divorce papers Stephen Hale had left after the company's collapse, abandoning her to a pile of bills and a ruined reputation. Every morning, Victoria looked into the mirror and saw herself, tired eyes, faded skin, and the gaze of someone who had fallen from the top without a parachute. She had applied for jobs everywhere, but the moment her last name, Hale, appeared, recruiters withdrew. The internet never forgets. Articles, videos, comments, they all remained, digital scars that would never fade. Eventually, she found work as a receptionist at a small dental clinic. The cheap polyester uniform, the smell of disinfectant, the constant ringing of phones, all of it reminded her of the days she once shouted at staff for serving her wine too slowly. One afternoon, while tidying magazines in the waiting area, she noticed the latest cover of Forbes. Jordan Mercer, the architect of corporate redemption. His calm, confident face stared straight ahead. Beneath it, the subheading read, "The man who turned a moment of humiliation into the dawn of a moral revolution." Victoria's hands trembled. She set the magazine down and looked out the window at the falling rain. No more anger, no more pride, only emptiness. If only I had stayed silent that day. The words escaped her lips like a confession. A few states away, in a small Kansas town, Stephen Hale worked at a local trucking company. He had sold everything and moved to the Midwest, where no one knew his past. Once a CEO commanding thousands, he now managed shipping orders from a modest office, stamping invoices and dispatching drivers. Each time he saw a truck bearing the Vidian Logistics logo pass by, his chest tightened. On long nights, Stephen sat alone, staring at an old photo of himself and Victoria at a charity gala. He whispered softly, "Maybe Jordan was right. Morality isn't the luxury of the rich. It's the foundation of everything." His voice faded into the silence of the empty room. Outside, the sound of truck horns echoed, rough but far more honest than any applause he'd ever received at the height of his power. As for Tessa Ward, the flight attendant who had once handled the situation on Flight 715, she now worked as a cashier at a discount store in Phoenix. Each morning, as she unlocked the register, she was haunted by the memory of that icy cabin, the moment she looked into Jordan Mercer's eyes and saw not anger, but disappointment. She had applied to several airlines, but none would hire her. Her name was flagged on internal no-hire lists, a silent sentence that followed her through the industry. Now, whenever a former passenger walked into the store, she simply lowered her head. Once a middle-aged man recognized her and said, "Weren't you a flight attendant? I remember you from that video." Tessa froze. "Yes, I was." The man nodded gently. "I hope you learned something." Then he walked away. That sentence echoed in her mind the entire day. Meanwhile, Captain Martin Keene, the man who once prided himself on being the guardian of order in the skies, now lived quietly with his wife in rural Oregon. His pilot's license hadn't been revoked, but no airline would hire him. Occasionally, when a plane crossed the sky above, he looked up, nostalgia flickering in his eyes. I should have trusted the truth, he thought. But now, truth was something he could only tell himself, inside an old wooden house, while the wind howled through the cracks. As for Ascend Air, its rebirth continued. A year later, the company had regained nearly 70% of its pre-crisis revenue. But more importantly, it had won back public trust. The media called it the Dignity Revolution. Business schools began including the Ascend Vidian case in ethics and leadership curricula, labeling it a defining example of leadership ethics and crisis recovery. In the main hall of Ascend's headquarters hung a poster bearing a handwritten quote from Jordan Mercer himself. "A company becomes truly great only when its people respect others. Not because they are customers, but because they are human." That evening, Jordan stood on the balcony of his high-rise apartment, gazing at the glowing lights of Seattle. Beside him, Naomi Blake was scrolling through her phone. "You know," she said softly, "people are calling you the CEO of conscience." Jordan chuckled, his voice light as the night breeze. "Conscience isn't a title, Naomi. It's a duty." His eyes lifted toward the horizon, where streaks of light moved slowly across the sky. An Ascend air jet passing above, leaving a white trail behind. "Do you hear it?" he asked. Naomi frowned slightly. "Hear what?" "The engine," he said. "I used to hear only noise. Now, I hear hope." Naomi smiled quietly, watching him. And Jordan, with calm, steady eyes, understood that karma never comes to punish. It comes to restore balance. And when people dare to face it, to change, to learn, karma becomes light that shows the way. 3 years after Flight 715, the world had long forgotten the scandal. But Jordan Mercer had not. To him, it wasn't merely a memory, it was the fire that forged a philosophy. True power doesn't lie in making others fear you, but in inspiring them to become better. That morning, Jordan boarded a flight to Singapore to attend a global conference on corporate ethics in the age of AI. His assistant had booked the ticket, and he didn't even notice which airline it was until a flight attendant greeted him with a polite bow, the logo on her uniform catching his eye. Ascend Air. For a brief moment, he froze, then smiled. Perhaps fate had just chosen to close its own circle. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, Jordan looked around. The atmosphere was serene, elegant, without ostentation. On the wall, a small silver plaque read, "Dignity first, because every journey begins with respect." He sat down in seat 1A, the same seat where everything had once begun. The leather was soft, but what he felt wasn't power, it was understanding. Light footsteps approached. A young flight attendant with East Asian features smiled warmly and said, "Good morning, Mr. Mercer. I'm May Tan, Head of Flight Services for North America. I just wanted to say, thank you." Jordan tilted his head slightly. "Thank me? For what?" May smiled. "For you. For what you did. Without you, many of us might still be people who only knew how to bow, not how to stand up for what's right. You didn't just change a company. You changed the lives of thousands." Jordan was silent for a moment. In the soft cabin light, he saw in her eyes the one thing he had always believed in. Dignity. He nodded gently. "If it hadn't been me that day, it would have been someone else eventually. Because what's right always finds its voice." May smiled, bowed slightly, and walked away. Jordan watched her leave, his eyes distant. As the aircraft began to taxi, he felt something strange, as if the past and present were merging into one. The same seat, the same airline, yet two entirely different worlds. 3 years ago, he was the man forced out of seat 1A. Now he sat there not because of status, but because an entire system had learned how to respect. The engines roared as the plane lifted off, piercing through layers of white clouds. Jordan closed his eyes, letting memories return. He saw again the blonde woman with the shrill voice demanding his seat, the captain's cold expression, the attendant's downcast eyes, the looks of disdain. And then himself, a man in a grey hoodie, silent, but carrying a storm inside. He opened his eyes and took a deep breath. All of it was just a lesson now. When the plane reached cruising altitude, a young boy seated behind him peered curiously down the aisle. He tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, who's that man? I saw him in a magazine." The mother smiled softly and whispered, "That's Mr. Jordan Mercer, the man who changed this airline." Jordan overheard, turned slightly, and smiled. "Would you like to sit in seat 1A for a moment?" The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Jordan said, standing up and gesturing for him to sit. This seat was once where a man learned the greatest lesson of his life. "What lesson?" the boy asked. Jordan smiled gently. That the way people treat an ordinary person reveals everything about who they truly are. The mother looked at him, her eyes glistening. Jordan quietly returned to his seat after letting the boy sit for a few minutes. Outside, the plane soared across the Pacific. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm reflection across Jordan's face. He took out his leather notebook and wrote, "Today, I sat in seat 1A again, but this time, no one was thrown out. No one was belittled. The world still has its flaws, but at least now, it knows how to make things right. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to say no to change an entire industry." He closed the notebook and smiled. Seat 1A was no longer a symbol of privilege. It was a symbol of human dignity. When the plane landed in Singapore, Jordan stood and joined the line of passengers. No one knew who he was, and he didn't need them to. He was just another traveler, one among many, each heading toward their own destination. On the airport's display screen, a message scrolled across, "Ascend Air, where every seat is 1A." Jordan read it and let out a quiet laugh. "Now they truly understand," he whispered. That evening, at the conference, he ended his keynote speech with a line that made the entire audience rise in applause. "Justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes in silence, through the act of one person who stays seated and refuses to move. Because the right kind of silence can echo louder than any shout." The spotlight shone on Jordan Mercer's face as a large screen behind him displayed a blue sky and a lone airplane ascending steadily through the clouds, small but unshakable. In that moment, everything came full circle. The cycle of cause and consequence was complete, not through vengeance, but through awakening. And so the journey of Jordan Mercer came to an end, not with applause, nor with a grand victory, but with the quiet transformation of an entire world. From a single first-class seat that was taken from him, he sparked a revolution called dignity. He did not seek revenge through power, nor did he respond with anger. He simply let justice speak through action and turned humiliation into the foundation for fairness. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to shout to be heard, but to stay silent long enough for the world to start listening. Jordan's story is not just about aviation, power, or wealth. It is about us, about how we see each other, treat each other, and measure a person's worth not by the seat they occupy, the color of their skin, or the clothes they wear, but by the heart they carry. If this story touched you, leave a like to help spread the message that respect is not a privilege, but a responsibility. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, where justice always finds its voice, and human dignity always stands above everything else. And if you believe the world only becomes truly better when every seat is seat 1A, comment below with just 3 words. Dignity first.